Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Pastor Scott Show. Good to be with you today. We are together each and every weekday from 3 to 5 right here on this station, all up and down California and even into Mexico. You can also watch us live. We're from anywhere on Rumble. Go to rumble.com or download the Rumble app on your smartphone or smart TV and click follow. Look for the Pastor Scott Show. Click follow. You'll never miss a show. All of our shows are on there live from 3 to 5, and they're on there saved on there. In case you ever missed the show, you can watch it later and watch some of our interviews as well. You can also follow me on social media at Pastor Scott Show and on our podcast at the Pastor Scott Show podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We talk about issues of the day from a Christian perspective. Let's go to 7171.
A federal district court in Kentucky is blocking President Biden's attempt to expand Title IX to include protections for gender identity. This ruling is a victory for women, according to the Alliance Defending Freedom. Attorneys, as they propose changes, would have forced schools to allow biological men onto girls' sports teams.
That is a decision that came down today, striking down a Biden administration rule about Title IX. And Title IX, and we'll get a better explanation in a minute, but that is what gives women equal rights when it comes to sports, scholarships, and all kinds of things. And the Biden administration changes that were announced last year would have forced states under great penalties if they did not allow biological men to play in women's sports or men to be in women's restrooms, even in schools, in high schools and middle schools, and I think even younger than that. Here is one of the things that the judge had to say in overturning this. Clip 7272.
Wrote this in his decision, quote, "When Title IX is viewed in its entirety, it is abundantly clear that discrimination on the basis of sex means discrimination on the basis of being a male or female. As this court and others have explained, expanding the meaning of on the basis of sex to include, quote, gender identity turns Title IX on its head."
So it's a big deal in this cultural conversation that we're having about this issue, and it affects all of our schools across the country, and it affects all of us in many different ways. With us to talk about it is David Schmutz. David Schmutz is the Executive Director for Christian Educators. You can learn more at christianeducators.org. It's a Christian organization that is for public school teachers that helps them connect with other Christian teachers and support them in their Christian faith in an environment where often they're told to do things that are against their faith. And this is a big issue for them. And they were a part of this lawsuit that won today. David, welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
Oh, thank you, Scott. So good to be with you.
David, first of all, the fires, where are you at, and are they affecting you at all?
Yeah, I'm in Orange County, so I'm pretty insulated from the fires directly. My father is in Pasadena, and he's actually had to evacuate. So he may be staying with us for a couple of days. We'll see how long the evacuation orders last. But yeah, so it's a big deal. So much loss going on.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that about your dad. Do you have a sense of what kind of loss he might be facing?
I don't think the fires are going to get to his house, so I think he'll be okay.
Yeah.
But I know many people are not. And
right.
Wow.
Right. Well, thank you for being with us even in the midst of all of that. Today is a big day for you and Christian educators because of the Title IX case and the Biden administration rules getting reversed. Help us understand that, because I think that many people might have forgot even what happened or what that was about and the implications of this nationally as well as in California. It might be different for us in California as things are, but tell us about what happened. What was the change? What's Title IX, first of all? Tell us that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you explained Title IX pretty well in your introduction, Scott, that it prevents sex discrimination in any school that receives federal funds, which is typically your public schools, both K-12 and also higher education. So Title IX is more famous for obviously allowing women athletes in colleges and high schools to have the same kind of opportunities that male athletes do. But Title IX was the Biden administration attempted to turn Title IX, as the judge said, on its head by interjecting gender identity into the conversation. And here it's probably good to back up and talk about the difference between state and federal responsibility here just
Yeah.
briefly, because this gets kind of muddied if you don't understand that. First, states are free, and even local school districts are free to pass laws and policies implementing transgender policies, really whatever they want to do. Although there are some limits now, according to some court rulings, including this one that are coming down. But so this does not affect state law. And generally speaking, in our constitutional federal system, the federal government cannot tell states how to run education. But what they can do is say, hey, we got a pile of money here, and if you want this money, you have to do it this way. And Title IX has always been based upon that enforcement idea that it's not required, but you'll lose a lot of money if you don't do it. So what this was an attempt to say, hey, we want these transgender policies that are already here in California by state law and other states as well. We want these in every public school in the nation. And so we're going to require you, at the risk of losing your federal funding, to implement them. So that means pronouns, bathrooms, locker rooms, sports teams, overnight school visits, the whole 9 yards would likely be resulting in these if these rules had passed. They did go into effect on August 1st, but our case and many other cases won injunctions that stopped them in 26 states. So they were kind of on hold until this ruling that happened today. Of all the cases that were in play over Title IX, it was our case that actually got the first nationwide ruling, and maybe the only one. We'll see what happens with that. So this case now means that nationwide, the attempt to rewrite Title IX is now dead. Original Title IX is still in effect, has nothing to do with the original Title IX. This was simply the attempt of the Biden administration to rewrite Title IX to include gender identity.
And this is really important for people to understand, is that the Title IX is the reason that you have girls' sports in schools. It's the reason why there's a boys' basketball team and a girls' basketball team. It's the reason why there's a baseball team, boys' baseball and girls' softball. There's a reason that happens, because otherwise you would have probably one team, or you'd have varsity and JV, and it would be only the best players in the school, regardless of gender, and it would be mostly, if not all, boys because of biology.
Sure. I mean, yeah. And I think most people will understand that the explosion of girls' athletic scholarships to colleges has been directly a result of Title IX.
That's right. And so when you have a biological man who wins the NCAA championship in swimming, what happens there is he takes away that scholarship or that potential future for the person who otherwise would have won. And
Right.
somebody gets moved off the podium. Or in cycling recently, there were, of the 3 winners, 2 of them were biological men in the women's event. This year, San Jose State, I think, right, that has the male
Yes.
volleyball player. And what happened is all of these women's teams started to forfeit and lose their opportunities for NCAA titles and jeopardize their own scholarships and stuff because it's not safe and because it's not fair. And this ruling would, if the Biden administration's rules would have kept, then all of the schools would have been forced to allow biological men, even on girls' teams.
Yeah, then schools like Boise State and others would not have been free to forfeit those games. Essentially, that would have been ruled as a sexual harassment violation or those kinds of things.
Right. It would have been sexual discrimination.
Right.
Right.
And could have resulted in their loss of federal funding. So.
And this just isn't colleges. This affects high schools and even grade schools to certain degrees, right? Because
Absolutely.
if your school is getting federal funds, then those funds are in jeopardy. If your school decided not to have girls' sports, you could lose federal funding. And in this case, if you decided not to allow a biological male on your girls' team, you could lose your lunch money quite literally.
Yeah. Yeah. And, these issues are really critical. But what we do, Scott, is we, of course, as you know, represent educators. And for educators who don't necessarily, although maybe they may have to coach these teams or supervise locker rooms, so it is a big deal for them. But another big deal for them is the pronoun issue, because this pronoun issue requires them to essentially affirm a worldview by speaking out a kid's pronoun. And how many variant pronouns would they have to remember, and if they make a mistake,
Right.
all of a sudden they might lose their job, right? And it's one thing to use someone's preferred pronoun because you want to be polite or considerate or whatever, don't want to cause a fuss, but it's another thing for that to be mandated by law. And this is what this was attempting to do, and that's why the court, that the judge ruled that this is a compelled speech issue, and it just cannot stand. It's a violation of these teachers' First Amendment rights. So we are thrilled that teachers around the country now do not face this threat for compelled speech and to have their rights be violated.
You're listening to the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is David Schmus. He's the executive director for Christian Educators. You can learn more at christianeducators.org, and he'll tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. But, the reason you were involved in this lawsuit is because of that, because you are supporting teachers who would find themselves in the position of maybe losing their job or entire career because they used the wrong pronoun or because they accidentally called a student, by what their name was yesterday, that now they want another name, and now they lose their job, which we've seen. We've seen that kind of movement happening across the country.
Yeah, that very thing happened to Peter Vlaming out in Virginia, and it took him 4 years of litigation to finally win that case. And it was not a federal case; it was a Virginia State Supreme Court case, but they ruled that was a violation of his free speech rights. And we've had other federal court cases that have ruled the same thing. And now our case has said the same thing as well. And so there's this growing consensus in the federal courts and beyond that this is a free speech right issue, and that states like California that have these laws about pronouns, they're in jeopardy because as soon as a California case, and there's already one in Oceanside, where a federal judge has issued really promising preliminary injunctions in. And it's possible that case may have been settled, and that's what happens, is that some of the cases get settled out of court and they don't establish precedents that we can use. But eventually there's going to be a case out of California or Minnesota or one of these states that has these laws that's going to get all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it's going to get struck down. So I'm very hopeful, even though it may take some time, that the tide has turned and will continue to roll. In terms of rolling back these things.
In California, it's different. So explain this ruling. It's national news, and so we've seen it on all the news stations. But in California, how do we see the difference here? Does it make any difference here, or are we still in the same position?
The only difference it may make is the fact that it gets this precedent into a federal ruling, and so that may help future cases. But no, California has passed egregious and radical state laws on these issues. And so the things you talked about earlier about chilled speech, about teachers getting fired because they might use the wrong pronoun, that is the law of the land here in California already. And this ruling, unfortunately, does not change that. And so I encourage your audience to pray, because Christian educators serving in California public schools are really in jeopardy. They have to walk this fine line, and the law even requires them to withhold information from parents about their students' gender identity and really their mental health. And that is unconscionable. We are hanging over a precipice here in California, right? In terms of our students' mental health, because we're cutting parents out of the equation. And imagine, sending your son or daughter to college and having them want to become a public school teacher and putting them in the situation where they're standing in the gap like that and caught between those two worlds. And it's challenging, but man, we have heroic educators who are doing that and representing Jesus in very powerful ways. But man, they need our help.
I think people need to understand how hard that is on so many of our teachers. I'm going to say 10 years ago, I had a school teacher at church come to me and talk about, I think she taught third or fourth grade. And one of the kids changed their genders, and she's supposed to talk about it. And but she didn't have a lot of government pressure at the time, or she didn't express that to me. She was just talking about, how do I love this kid who's obviously going through stuff? And maybe they got some real serious stuff going on, or maybe it's just a phase and next week is going to be different. She was very loving about it. She seemed like she had some freedom to handle it the way she wanted. I don't feel like she would have that freedom today.
Yeah, no, not at all. And we still advise educators to try to handle this relationally with compassion, realizing, as you said, that this kid who's confused about their gender is going through some really, really difficult situations. But man, to think that the school has the resources to understand and help this kid without including the parents, with cutting them out of the conversation, that to me is the height of arrogance, right? That we as a school would say, well, we know better for your kid, and if they're going to identify as this gender, we're going to hide it from you and play along with their confusion. man, we are doing those kids a huge disservice. And there's been some lawsuits along those lines as well
Yes.
of kids who have committed suicide or kids who have experienced tremendous mental health challenges. And then parents have said, "Hey, how come you kept me in the dark?" And so forth. So yeah, it's a real tough situation out
And
there.
those lawsuits are growing because
Hmm.
it's not just for hiding it, something your kid is talking about at school from you. That kid might end up making medical decisions without your knowledge or
That's
being
right.
pressured into medical decisions. Who now can in California go to their doctor, and I think if they're 12, I think they can
Hmm.
have a private conversation with the doctor
Hmm.
that you're not a part of. That shocked me when my
Yeah.
kid was 12 and our pediatrician said, "Oh, he's allowed to." Really? I'm not for
Right.
that.
Right.
And I don't think most teachers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's very few teachers who actually want to lie to parents about anything,
Mm-mm,
you know?
mm-mm. I mean, yeah, many of us teachers, and myself included, have had situations where we had students who come from an abusive environment. I've had to call Child Protective Services, for example, for some of my students when I taught. But that's what you do, right? When there's a situation that's abusive, you call Child Protective Services. You don't simply assume that because a kid is transgender and they say they don't want their parents to know that that's necessarily the way to go. You're trusting a 14 or 15-year-old to understand the best way forward, right? Rather than bringing their parents in, which just doesn't end well.
That's right. You're listening to the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is David Schmus. He is the director of Christian Educators. You can learn more at ChristianEducators.org. In fact, tell us more about Christian Educators and what you do there. And we have a lot of teachers who are listening, and there's probably a lot of teachers at home today because I think LA Unified is home. My
Yeah,
kids are home today. It's like a snow day.
yeah,
It's their
yeah.
first one ever. I turned off their alarms last night, and they thought they were late to school, and I said, "Nope, snow day today."
Yeah, well, let me first say that, man, if you're a teacher who's been impacted by these fires, we are praying for you, and I'm so sorry. I know there's at least two elementary schools in the Palisades area that have been burned down, and then also apparently 30% of the Pacific Palisades Charter School has also been burned, and so I know there's some real heartache going on out there. But yeah, so what we Christian Educators does two things. One is we support teachers who want to walk out their calling as Christians in public schools and do that without breaking the law. So we equip them, what you can and can't do. We encourage them to walk in hope and joy rather than anger or frustration. And we have a whole series of ministry initiatives and publications, an award-winning magazine that help them do just that. The second thing we do is we provide a professional association for them that's an alternative to the California Teachers Association. Now, I think every teacher in California knows a lot about the CTA and knows how radical their policies are. And of course, it's the CTA that has pushed these very transgender policies that we're talking about. And your typical California teacher will pay the CTA close to $1,300 every year to advance that agenda. And they do that because they're afraid. They say, well, I'm afraid if I'm not a part of the union, I'll lose benefits, or I won't have liability insurance, or I won't have anyone to protect me or advocate for me if I have an issue. And none of that is true. The fact of the matter is, in 2018, there was a Supreme Court case called the Janus case that says that you can get out of your union and not pay them a dime of dues. And then you can join Christian Educators for way less. We're about 20% of the cost of the union dues that we pay here in California. So you save 80%. It's like giving yourself a 1% raise just by quitting the union and joining us. And then we provide double the liability coverage that the union does. We provide, I think, better job action protection and consultation. When you call us, you get to talk to former superintendents, people who are experts in their field about whatever situation you're facing. And then some people think that we only deal with religious issues on campus, but no, actually we deal with any issue on campus. Let's say you have an IEP that went wrong, or you had to grab separate a kid from a fight, or it left a bruise on him, or let's say another teacher makes an allegation against you. We walk teachers through all those issues. So we love to serve teachers in California, especially it's our number one state. We have members in all 50 states. But California is our number one state. We'd love to serve you. So
How can people get involved if they're a teacher or they know a teacher? Sorry, that's my
gonna evacuate.
evacuation. Let's say here. I'm not ignoring evacuation orders in case anybody's wondering. I'll explain that after the break. I think they're canceling what we had before. We'll talk about that after the break. I want to give you time to tell us how people can connect.
All right, yeah. So ChristianEducators.org is the best way to find us, and we also have a couple events coming up. that I'm really excited about. One January 18th in Rialto at the First Assemblies of God, and also February 22nd at Biola University in La Mirada. These are Awake experience events designed to help teachers get out of the kind of being stuck and maybe believing some of the lies about themselves that the enemy wants us to believe, and getting free to be just awakened ambassadors for Christ in their schools. And we kind of help them understand how to unpack that and walk that out in faithful and amazing and powerful ways. So go to our website and go to christianeducators.org/awake. And you'll find references to both those events, again, January 18th in Rialto and February 22nd at Biola. We'd love to see you there and bless you.
All right. Very good. That's christianeducators.org. David Schmus, thanks for being with me today.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
All right. Stay safe, and I'll pray for your dad. I hope everything is okay with him and the fires. All right, everybody. This is the Pastor Scott Show. 888-528-2557 is the number if you want to join the conversation. 888-528-2557. So I'm getting evacuation warnings and evacuation disregard. And you know what? I'll explain it to you when I come back, and we'll see how things are as the Pastor Scott Show Thursday edition continues. Stay tuned.